Welcome to another segment of the BYU Management Society's Learn from Professionals initiative. Our goal is to provide guidance to young adults that are either exploring various careers or are ready to jumpstart a career. Today, we have an opportunity to learn from a seasoned professional in the cybersecurity industry. Mr. James Krainock is living a storied career over 20 years in cybersecurity, specializing in digital forensic and cybersecurity critical incident management in public and private sectors. As a leader, investigator, subject matter expert, and educator, Mr. Krainock has worked to advance investigative techniques and technology in cybersecurity for industry, law enforcement, military, and government agencies worldwide. He has conducted and led hundreds of cyber intrusion and information security investigations for small to mid-sized businesses to Fortune 500 companies, and has instructed many domestic and foreign government agencies. Mr. Krainock currently works for Amazon as an industry specialist in threat operations. He holds a master's level industry certification in law of data security and investigations, as well as several technical certifications in various cybersecurity disciplines. Absent an advanced academic degree of his own, he is an active advocate for pursuing higher education, available in all of its various forms. James grew up in Mesa, Arizona, the youngest of 8 children, raised by hardworking and loving parents, to which he credits for nurturing his talents and interests. Outside of work, he can be found outdoors, hunting, fishing, skiing, endurance running, or coaching baseball. He and his wife, Shannon, live in Rexburg, Idaho, and together enjoy world travel and beach getaways. They have 3 children and 2 grandchildren. So welcome, James.
Thanks for having me, Scott. Thank you for that introduction. And after the tough winter we've had here in eastern Idaho, I'm thinking a lot about those beach getaways the last few days. But yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, we appreciate your willingness to share your expert advice with our viewers. James, can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to pursue a career in cybersecurity?
Yeah, so my career path has been pretty windy, I have to say. I do a lot of mentoring and a lot of presentations for different education institutions and such. And one of the things I always talk about is how windy my career path has been. And but to start out, I was exposed at a very early age to technology. Back in 1980, I was 8 years old, and my parents brought home one of the first home computers that the world had ever seen back in 1980, and they basically, put it on the dining room table with a giant manual and said, "Here you go, figure it out." And I always had an interest ever since then, and just in technology in general, in all different forms, and in programming and such. And my first job out of high school was a tech job, and I was doing circuit board design. And so I was, again, into the tech industry, and that part of the tech industry anyway, pretty early on in life. But the real turning point was in 2001. I had been working in the field of CD and DVD production, and back when CD recordable discs and DVD recordable discs had first come out. I was working in that field, and I became very interested in how the data was stored on that medium and how it could be exploited, how data could be hidden, or if I could reverse engineer a disk and figure out, who made it, who wrote it. And so essentially I was, exploring forensics in of that medium, specifically of CDs and DVDs. And in that exploration and just tinkering that I was doing with that led me to be involved in a fraud investigation with the Secret Service and the U.S. Marshals shortly after 2001. And it turns out I was one of very few people at that time that was doing any kind of forensic analysis on CD and DVDs. So I just kind of ran with that opportunity. It was a successful investigation, and they came to me later on and said, there are other use cases for this type of forensic analysis. And they asked me, well, it was a different agency, but a different federal law enforcement agency came to me and said, we'd really like you to be involved in this type of investigative work. So I did, and I started advancing, more in that field in forensics, and then very heavy into investigations of child exploitation and human trafficking, identifying victims and perpetrators of those crimes and doing dark web investigations. And then that led me to really be interested in cybersecurity as a whole and the various disciplines within cybersecurity. And so my career path has kind of gone all around. I couldn't have told you, 40 years ago, 45 years ago, I couldn't have told you that this is what I would be doing today. But I can talk a little bit more about that. But I've always seized opportunities that in front of me. I've always, continued learning within my interests in technology and in leadership. And I think that's one of the reasons why, while it's been a winding path, I've always been able to at least advance forward, and both in my learning and, financially for my family.
So James, you said that you seized the opportunity.
Yeah.
So you work today as an industry specialist in threat operations for Amazon. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came into that position?
Sure. So I've been with Amazon for a little over 3 years, about 3.5 years now. And when I was brought on board, it was a time when they were developing a new security team or a new security capability within one pillar of the company. And I have experience in building, cybersecurity teams and incident response teams and doing forensics and prosecuting digital crimes. So I was brought on board to Amazon to bring that, broad industry experience and help guide the building of that new capability. And we're 3.5 years in, and we're very different and much more advanced than we were 3.5 years ago. And so I continue to look for opportunities to just keep growing. And I will tell you that Amazon is, as big as it is, has many opportunities for that, to be able to continue to advance your career. They're very supportive of that. And that's what I do here at Amazon, at least.
So James, you said that your career has been on a winding path.
Yeah.
So has it been a continual upward path, or have you had to overcome significant obstacles?
That's a great question. And I can say that I have most definitely had obstacles. Small ones where it just requires, a quick shift in one direction or another, or a redirect in some way to find a more upward or direct path. And then I've had some big obstacles where there was a point back in, it was around that time, around 2001 or shortly after, where I essentially had to reinvent my entire career. It was, something occurred, something happened, and the career path that I was on was just not going to be sustainable. And it was a big setback because I put a lot of effort into what I do, and regardless of what it is, I'm passionate about what I spend my time doing, and I put a lot of work into that part of my career at that time. So I had to pivot. I had to essentially reinvent myself, and I did that. And part of that was reinventing myself in a way where I could create a more direct and upward career path. And that's one of the reasons why I chose cybersecurity, because as I mentioned, there's many different pillars to the industry, but it's one that will never go away, and it will always continue to be advancing. Currently, there are huge needs in the field for workers across all disciplines within cyber. There's over 400,000 open cybersecurity roles just in the United States.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so that opportunity and that longevity, and in a technology that I'm very interested in, and had a skill set in already, was one reason why I chose to really focus an effort in cyber.
So James, can you, for those individuals that are interested in a career in cybersecurity, can you talk a little bit about the education requirements?
Yeah, so if you poke around on job sites, and even on Amazon, look at some of the job openings and different jobs within cybersecurity or information security, you'll see that many of them say that a bachelor's degree is either required, or what you're often seeing now is that it says it's preferred. And that would be a bachelor's degree in some kind of technology or some technology science, like computer science or a related discipline. But we're seeing a shift in that. We're seeing a shift that the formal education requirement is more of a suggestion than a requirement. And that's really exciting, actually, because it opens up a lot of opportunities for employment. And it also helps companies try to bolster their recruiting and trying to fill these 400,000+ roles with those people that have the technical expertise and the technical skill to do these jobs, but may not have a 4-year degree or more advanced degree. So that's one exciting change that we've seen over the last probably 6 to 8 years in technology in general, but also in cybersecurity. And BYU has a great cybersecurity curriculum. I actually just met with BYU Idaho last week and learned about their plans in offering a cybersecurity degree. So that's exciting. And those are definitely great paths to go. There's also opportunities within military, Air Force cyber, Navy cyber, Army cyber, law enforcement. There's all kinds of opportunities out there to get that education. And then there's alternate paths. There's companies that provide specific training on the specific skill sets that are required to do different jobs within some of those pillars in cybersecurity, such as penetration testing or threat operations, which is the area that I work in, like incident management and investigations and forensics. There's companies that offer specific training, and even boot camp style in some cases. And there's actually a lot of online learning resources in cybersecurity. So there are many paths today to the cybersecurity role. And but a degree, bachelor's degree is one that would really help in other ways as well. I mean, it also gives you the soft skills to be successful in the long term in a career path in cyber. And that's important. That's something that gets ignored sometimes. The soft skills like communication and writing and those types of things.
So I know in my career, it's a lifetime of learning. I imagine with cybersecurity, it's changing all the time. Sometimes it's certifications that may be the most important thing, but tell us about the learning curve in cybersecurity and what's required.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always advancing, always changing. It does require lifelong learning. That is for sure. I mean, I'm an example of that. I've been in cyber for over 20 years, investigations, forensics in general for over 20 years. And I just got a new certification just last summer. I'm 50 years old, and I feel like every year I'm still going to school in some way to keep advancing my knowledge and my capabilities in cybersecurity. And last year it was focusing on the law, and that was the certification that you mentioned during the intro for law of data security and investigations that I got last year. But yeah, the field is always advancing, and that's both rewarding and challenging. It provides some, if you can keep up, if you can keep that education going, it's rewarding because of the longevity that you can have in cybersecurity field. But it's also challenging because, you're trying to, as a general rule, you're trying to stay ahead of your adversary, whoever your adversary might be. In the case of, an advanced nation state government adversary, or small collective hacker or activist groups, or even insider threats in an organization. A good cybersecurity program is trying to stay ahead of those threats. And sometimes those threats might be advancing faster than our defenses can keep up. So there has to always be innovation and learning and experimentation to try to keep that edge. And that's part of the challenging part in a long-term career in the field. But it does require continuous education. And I recommend, an employer that supports that supports your continuing education in the field for many years.
James, I know about some of the investigations that you've been involved with. They're really pretty amazing. But would you mind sharing with us one or two of the cyber security investigations and what eventually it was that took down the criminals?
Absolutely. So I will summarize so as to not be too long-winded, but to also not go into too much detail on some of these investigations, because they can be sensitive. But I'll give you an example of a child exploitation investigation, and then I'll give you an example of a cybersecurity investigation. It's been several years since I worked in any child exploitation investigation. So I work mostly in the private sector now, but when I was working with federal law enforcement and essentially, governments all over the world, there was a lot of work to track down those dark web threat actors, we would call them, or dark web marketplaces, which were distributing and basically contributing to the problem of child pornography, child exploitation. And so I did a lot of work for almost 9 years straight in just that area in child exploitation investigations. And one particular case comes to mind where we were able to not only rescue or not only identify the victims, multiple victims, but also leading, which were previously unknown to law enforcement, and then have that lead back to the arrest of the perpetrators, but then also have that same investigation lead to the takedown of a major dark web marketplace, which was selling this type of material and distributing other things and selling other things like drugs and other contraband through the dark web. So essentially, that work involves leaving no stone unturned. And instead of just being satisfied with identifying a victim and bringing down a perpetrator, we go after the larger network as a whole. And sometimes those investigations take years. That particular investigation took 3 years, and it started with essentially one series of photographs of a child victim and identifying the location of that one child, working backwards from there, learning that child's identity, finding that child's abuser, and then being able to link that abuser's online activity to their membership in the dark web marketplace, and then other parts of that investigation that I can't get into and how we did that, but then how we were able to infiltrate that marketplace and essentially eliminate it. So that's an example of that kind of work. It is very exciting. It was very difficult in many different ways to deal with that crime type, to be an investigator or do the analysis of that type of crime. Very rewarding, and I'm glad that I did that work, and I'm glad that I had the opportunity to be involved in such a righteous cause. However, I will say that I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore. It's difficult work, and those people that work in child exploitation and human trafficking, in my opinion, are angels. So that's one example in that field. Another one would be a cybersecurity incident where this was a large retail, and this was a little more recent, about 5 years ago. This is a large retail organization that had retail outlets, essentially nationwide here in the United States. And there were signs that their point of sale system had been hacked. Their point of sale systems were essentially displaying erratic behavior and even shutting down during processing of transactions. And so they contacted the company that I worked for at the time, and we started doing a forensic analysis of one of the endpoints which had been exploited, which essentially was exhibiting this behavior. And we were able to determine that, in fact, it was a nation state threat actor, that this particular threat actor is one that usually the motivation behind their hacking is usually money. A lot of other countries have different motivations, whether it's intelligence on the government or to just cause havoc in business in the United States, or intellectual property theft. But this particular threat actor in the Southeast Asia region, without saying exactly who they are, their motivation was purely money. And in this particular case, this hack began with one single laptop in the back room of one of these retail offices in a mall. And that laptop was simply used for playing music that you hear over the speakers when you're there shopping. That was the sole purpose for that laptop. But because that's all it was used for, they kind of didn't pay much attention to the security of that particular laptop. It was on the same network, on the same corporate network as all of their point of sale systems nationwide. And
amazing.
I don't recall how it got exposed to the internet exactly, but nonetheless, the hackers found that laptop, they exploited that laptop, and then they were able to pivot and what we call move laterally across the entire corporate network and install malware across hundreds of point of sale systems, which were scraping credit card data. So we were able to identify this, contain it, shut the threat down. And in the process of doing so, an interesting fact is I happened to shop at that retailer, and just out of curiosity, I looked for my own credit card information in the data that had been exfiltrated from that company. And I did find my own credit card data in that. And when the company went public and announced, publicly they'd been hacked, and they sent out the notifications to their customers, I actually received a notification of my house that I had been one of the impacted victims. That, in fact, I was the one who investigated the whole thing.
That's
So
something.
Yeah, that's one example of incident response.
So, James, what trends are impacting cybersecurity now?
Well, you hear a lot about artificial intelligence, AI, right?
Mhm.
You hear a lot about that now with the emergence of Chat GPT and other big tech companies, including Amazon, which are coming out and saying more about what they're doing with um, generative artificial intelligence. And in the terms of cybersecurity, it's both a positive and a negative AI and how it's advancing things. So innovation in artificial intelligence allows for advancements in security automation, which is great. We can use AI to automate some of those tasks in cybersecurity when we detect anomalous activity or malicious activity on a network. You can use AI to better detect that activity, classify it, categorize it, and more effectively contain it and essentially respond quicker and more efficiently to threats, which is great. So AI in that sense is very helpful. But it also adds a level of sophistication to the threat actor. If the threat actor is using artificial intelligence to better understand or map the environment that they want to attack, or in some cases to, one of the most effective ways that we are victimized. I say we, not meaning Amazon, just we as a public, how we're victimized by hackers is through phishing. And that's, typically like receiving an email that's so interesting that you just have to click that link, right?
Mhm.
And AI, in one sense, AI can be used to make those emails more interesting, to make them more tailored towards you, the recipient, and what I might be able to learn about you, Scott Pond, online from your social media or whatever you have out there, and then use AI to craft a message to you that you just can't resist replying to, or you just can't resist clicking.
Mm.
And so in that case, AI, poses an advanced threat that we're working to be able to counter.
Now that's really something. That's kind of scary.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
James, what advice would you give to someone that is interested in jumpstarting a career in cybersecurity? What should they be doing?
Well, I'd say first and foremost, if you're truly interested, if you've decided that this is a field that I want to, you've researched a little bit, or somebody that works in cyber, and you want to actually identify an education path or career path for yourself, find a mentor. That's so valuable. I can't even tell you how valuable that is. I've had mentors, and I am a mentor right now to several people, and I do a lot of mentorship type of activities, speaking to groups, or an adjunct lecturer at a couple different universities where I'll go talk and mentor, and specifically for cyber education. But that is hugely important, to find someone who's in the industry that has a broad view of all the different pillars of disciplines within cybersecurity, because they cover everything from, within cyber, you have security architecture, cloud security and engineering, you have risk management, governance, risk and compliance, you have security assessments, you have application security, security operations, monitoring, forensics, incident response. There's all these different pillars, and they're unique skill sets in each one. So it's important to have a mentor that has a broad view, that can help you early on to identify where you should spend your time in education into one of those pillars that would fit your interest and fit your skill sets, fit your knowledge base the best. And along with that, I would say, in addition to having a mentor, is I always encourage to establish a broad technical skill set. So look across those different pillars and look for areas of opportunity and education within each pillar where you could learn more about security engineering in the cloud, even though maybe you might be more interested in being a penetration tester. Having that skill set in cloud security would make you a better penetration tester. So these skill sets are all complementary. So I recommend having a broad technical skill set. And then, as I mentioned before, another piece of advice I always give is don't forget the soft skills, the communication skills, leadership, writing. Always challenge yourself. Always be looking for continuing education and communications, leadership, and writing, those types of things, because that will be what helps you continue to advance and be able to work in leadership positions within cyber.
So I know you're a great mentor, and I imagine that from time to time you're also a great life coach. So tell me about, in the industry, I imagine you can get bogged down in an investigation and you're spending all your time on this investigation. So what advice would you give to a young person that wants to be in cybersecurity, but also wants balance in their life?
Yeah, that's another great question. And I've given that a lot of thought over the years, because you're exactly right. I mean, sometimes you just can't, you feel like you just can't leave that investigation. You feel like you just can't go home for the day, or you just can't turn that monitor off and walk away. And even sometimes when you do, I mean, I'll be honest, I mean, even sometimes when you force yourself to walk away, you're still seeing that code in the middle of the night in your mind, or you're still going over it, and so it can be difficult. But I will say this, that balance, if you measure balance in your life by the number of hours you spend doing something, which is what I hear people measure it by hours, measure balance by hours. I hear them do that all the time. A colleague of mine did that just recently, even, and even published something in our Slack channel that said, essentially, here's how you balance a 24-hour day and have balance in your life. Well, I just kind of laughed, because we don't all have the same lives. We don't all lead the same lives, and we have different commitments and things. So if you measure by hours spent, in my opinion, Scott, you will never truly find balance. There will always be an imbalance. I mean, we spend a third of our time, ideally, sleeping. Just try, a third of our time just trying to recoup and to re-energize for the next 16 hours ahead, for the next day. And so I've found that measuring it by hours is just not an effective way to do that. So what I suggest is you measure balance in your life by meaningful engagement. Identify those categories, of those pillars of your own life, such as your family, your faith, your work, your education, your hobbies, because it is important to have hobbies. And look at, measure, is your time spent, whatever that time is, in all those categories, is it meaningful? And are you achieving the goals that you have in each one of those categories, rather than trying to just separate your day by hours? Separate your time by meaningful engagement instead.
Mm-hmm.
There could be days between when you engage in the work in church, or your hobbies, or your education. But if that time is meaningful, then I see that it's easier to find balance, or feel like you have more balance in your life. Also, a suggestion I have there is to set boundaries, specifically around work. That can be difficult at times, but I always suggest that that's something that you look for in an employer. If unless you're self-employed, and that can be even more difficult because there's never ending work to do, right? But in an employer, you want someone that understands those boundaries, that understands that these other parts of your life are as important to you being a good employee. To have these other factors like your faith and your education and your hobbies in your life. So you have to set the boundaries and be as firm as you can with them. And then meaningful and productive life, as part of that question, Scott, that's subjective. Meaningful and productive, what does that look like for you? What does that look like for me? It's different. It's different for everyone. And so what I suggest on that side is don't compare yourself to other people. Don't compare your life, your occupation, your bank account, your material things. Don't get into the habit of measuring your successes by material things in a comparison to someone else. It's not a race. This is something that I tell my own kids, my adult kids, is it's not a race. Don't compare yourself to others. And chasing your ambitions should always grow and strengthen your character. It should never degrade it. It should never detract from growth in your own character. And if you see that, that's something to be alarmed by, and maybe take as a sign that you need to maybe reassess your priorities and maybe work a little harder at finding that balance.
Well, James, I want to thank you for the time that you've taken today to not only provide career advice, but also life advice to young adults, individuals that want to be successful in their life. They want to have purpose in their life, and so that's part of our program, is to help them to do that. So to wrap up this video, we'd like to remind our viewers that they can either reach out on their own to seasoned professionals to schedule informational interviews, or ask another person that for an introduction to a professional. We like to do informational interviews, and encourage you to watch the video on our website, Conducting Informational Interviews. James, thanks again for your time. You're an amazing guy. I know you've done amazing things and helped many people, not only in the United States, but around the world. And we appreciate your service that you provided.
Oh, thank you, Scott. Thanks for having me. And I look forward to anybody that might want to connect with me one-on-one and continue to be a mentor and help give a hand up.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right.